further ado, I would like to invite the moderator and speakers for session 3 to commence the panel in a minute. So guiding us in a discussion on the political outlook in Thailand and Myanmar, our moderator, Ms. Mortaza, fellow and acting coordinator of the Myanmar Studies Program at ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute, as well as her distinguished panelists, Dr. Kemtong Tunsakun and Professor Ardeth Mong Tong Mung. Ms. Tazar, please.
Thank you, Afra, for that kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. This is a challenging time to start a panel. We're competing with a very delicious dessert. And the topic that we have as a digestive of sorts following that dessert is certainly quite heavy. You know, this is the first time we're meeting in person after the hiatus imposed by the pandemic. In 2019, just before the pandemic lockdown disrupted our lives and changed the way we view many things in this world forever, the outlook for Thailand at that regional forum in 2019 was about the upcoming elections. And of course, who won the popular vote, who got to form a government, and what changes were made to the constitution in Thailand, and all that. We are now seeing another set of general election scheduled, being planned, preparations being made for Thailand. And to walk us through what to expect, what are the drivers that are going to address the disruptions that were made in the past, what type of changes. I have with me Ajahn Kemtong Tunsakun from the Political Science Department of Chulalongkorn University. And I really look forward to how he's going to walk us through those complexities of the political outlook for Thailand facing its second round of general election after the 2014 coup. But Thailand's not the only country in mainland Southeast Asia that's also facing the prospect of polls. Whatever we may choose to call it, there are also the prospect of some very wishful willing of polls, elections, some will call it, happening in Myanmar, which has been experiencing an ongoing multi-crisis, multi-dimensional crisis, dare I even say poly-crisis, since not just the military coup on February the 1st, 2021, but, well, even before experiencing the disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, and the National League for Democracy government actually went ahead and convened general elections in 2020, which it won in a landslide, but then again faced a different type of disruption in challenges to this second landslide win by the National League for Democracy, and using the claim of electoral fraud, a military coup, disrupting the nascent tentative steps being taken by the civilian government in Myanmar towards further democratization and opening up of the country. And so now we are facing the uncertain prospects of what do polls mean imposed, willed by a military junta that definitely did not come into power with the will of the people. And to really give us that context, again, walk us through the very complex situation of Myanmar's multidimensional crisis and the sentiments of the various stakeholders, actors, and most importantly, the communities, the people in Myanmar, whose wills and aspirations have been disrupted. We have with us here this afternoon, today, Professor Ardeth Mong Tong Mung, who is just immediate past chair of the Political Science Department at University of Massachusetts Lowell. And with that brief contextualization and also keeping our eye very much on what the political outlook in these two countries with very intricately intertwined histories, and bilateral relations. I'm going to now hand over the time and the microphone first to Professor Ardeth to share with us her insights on the political outlook for Myanmar in 2023.
First of all, let me first express my gratitude to ISEAS for having me here and giving me the opportunity to come and share with you my assessment of political outlook in Myanmar, which is not very encouraging. So I'm going to give you a brief summary of the evolving political economic situation since the military coup in 2021 and assess its outlooks for 2023. So Myanmar's economy, just like any other countries in the world, suffer greatly due to COVID in 2020. However, the military that staged a coup under the name of State Administration Council, and now we call it SAC, in February 2021 against the NLD party, which won a landslide victory, really has unleashed a nationwide resistance as well as the worst humanitarian crisis that the country has not seen since the end of World War II. So popular demonstrations against the military was initially peaceful, but it turned into violent after the military began resorting to extreme repression in the later weeks of February 2021. Myanmar since then fallen into a spiral of violence following declarations of war by the National Unity Government, which is a parallel government composed mainly of the National League for Democracy. So the conflict areas now expanded from ethnic minority areas, which used to be the center of strong resistance against the center government, to Burma-dominated areas, the majority Burma-dominated areas where the NLD supports are strong. So you can see here in the chart the number of armed clashes, battles since then range between 200 and 300 per month. And by the end of 2021, Myanmar experienced a negative growth, and the poverty rate has increased from 25% to 40%. About 2.2 million jobs have been lost due to the coup. And the local currency value has declined from 1,300 kyats per dollar at the beginning of the military coup to 5,000 kyats per dollar by the end of September 2022. By December 2022, about estimated 30,000 people have been killed because of the coup, of which 2,685 people were killed by the military. Additional 1 million people were displaced. In addition to that, about over 30,000 political prisoners have been in prison. So if you look at the price of rice, which is the main staple of Myanmar, the prices have gone up 2 or 3 times depending on the region. And then the other cooking oil, which is another staple in Myanmar, the prices has also gone up 2 or 3 times here. Consumer price inflation rate is about 19%. And you can see here Myanmar is at the top compared to other countries that we're looking at. Agriculture sector, which employs the largest populations in the country, was hit hardest due to increase in imported price imported goods, which are fuel, fertilizer, decreased prices for the output and due to conflict. And cultivated acres, as well as production and agricultural productivity, have also declined. According to the survey conducted by IFPRI, estimated 10% of the 10%, there will be estimated 10% decrease in rice output in the 2022 harvest. And Myanmar, because of all these conflicts and economic political crisis, Myanmar now ranks 23rd most fragile state and is the only country in Southeast Asia that is on the top 40 list. However, by the early, after a brief period of chaos, the military, the SAC has gradually regained control over major cities and across the country, and has gradually stabilized the country and the economy by relying on extreme measures and draconian approaches. They have imprisoned all the people in the opposition movement, including top NLD leaders, Aung San Suu Kyi. They have indiscriminately killed, tortured, arrested people, destroyed the properties, and burned down tens of thousands of villages. And the Central Bank of Myanmar initially resorted to market measures to increase confidence in local currencies. But when they could not do that, they started relying on draconian measures such as imposing fixed exchange rate, making all account holders of foreign currency to convert their foreign currency into kyats, and by forcing bankers and companies to delay payment in foreign currency. So because of these, the SAC was gradually able to stabilize the economy. So you can see that prices of fuel and consumer, some other goods such as cooking oil spike up and then by November 2022, they have all come down. So, and you can also see here, there are more registrations of companies in 2022 compared to 2021, but the numbers have not been at the number is still lower than the pre-pandemic and pre-coup era. And a survey conducted by the IFPIR survey, which is based on 12,000 households in 2021 and 2022, showed that the number of households that reported having income reductions have significantly have reduced in 2021 from 2021 to 2022 here. So the problem is that the SAC has not been able to effectively run the country. Despite those slow recovery, most of the country's territories are contested. In addition to that, there has been increase in state authorities' impunity, corruption, crimes, and gambling practices, and productions of drug trade, drug users, and intensifications of extraction of resources. There has also been near collapse of state services in healthcare and education because of the higher rate of civil disobedience movement against the coup by teachers and by healthcare workers. There has been a massive outflow of populations out of the country to neighboring countries for physical security as well as for job and economic opportunities. Household in conflict areas estimated about 13.2 million people now experiencing food security crisis. The IFPRR survey, which is based on 12,000 households, also show that households that feel physically insecure, the percentage have also increased in 2022. So, however, the situations have vary across the country, across the places, and fluctuate on a monthly basis. So regions with strongest armed resistance area tend to suffer the highest rate of violence, whereas communities that are composed mainly of military supporters, communities that are under the SAC control area, or communities that are that are controlled by the armed groups that are friendly to the military, tend to have a relatively more peaceful situations. The type of violence and the level of violence also varies. In the strong resistant areas, the nature of the violence also varies. So in rural and remote areas, they tend to experience higher level of direct armed conflicts, and SACs indiscriminate killings through heavy artillery, airstrike, and burning of bridges. However, in urban areas, resistant forces use guerrilla strategy by targeted bombing of military, of businesses or government offices, and assassinations of people alleged to support the military, while the military use relatively more targeted forms of repressions. So you can see here the nature and the types of violence varies here. Sagaing, which is the most violent area, has the highest number of armed conflicts. But if you look at Mandalay and Yangon regions, which are the two major city areas, have very low level of armed clashes. But then again, they are the second and the third ranked in terms of violence against civilians and explosions. And here is the number of deaths, which varies across regions. So violence, we can also look at the variations in the nature and intensity of violence by looking at who control the areas and the level of resistance against SAC. So again, the areas that are under the SAC control area, the areas that under the armed groups that are friendly to the SAC areas tend to remain relatively peaceful compared to the areas that are controlled by the armed groups that are actively fighting against the government, against the SAC. So here is how the map look like. The darker areas are the ones that experience the most violent forms of incidents. The centers of violence also change on a monthly basis. And I think the best example would be the relationship between Rakhine Army, which is based in Rakhine State, and the SAC. And they both were able to maintain a bilateral peace agreement in 2021. However, in around August, September, they reverted to armed conflicts. And by November, they were able to sign another temporary bilateral ceasefire, but tensions remain high. So if you're going to ask me what's going to happen to Myanmar, I want to talk first about the 9 different scenarios that I came up immediately after the military staged a coup. So I define military strategies in terms of no accommodation if the military is going to continue to rule the countries, and partial accommodation. It's in the case where the military decided to share the power with civilian governments, and then no accommodation. This is the situations where the military full accommodations. This is the situations where the military would allow the situations to return back to the pre-coup period. And I also look at the strategies of the resistance movement in terms of compliance, partial resistance, and full resistance. And so each of these scenarios represent the outcome of the interactions between each of the strategies adopted by the military and by the opposition movement. And we have a scenario range from 3C, where you have military is under the civilian control, and Myanmar is under the federal democracy, which is the ideal objective situations for opposition movement, to a deadlock situation where military dictatorship or partial military rule is contested by the opposition movement. So unfortunately, we are now at a deadlock situation for a number of reasons. Because both sides have certain advantages and limitations. So for the anti-SCC, for the pro-democracy movement, they have a high level of legitimacy. They receive, Western support. UN Security Council recently issued statements against the issue resolutions against the military. And United States just passed a law that would provide non-lethal support to the pro-democracy movement. We have international organizations that are that are collecting data to bring the military for its charges against military for violations of human rights. And the NUG government has also been really good at collecting money, collecting funds, and they act like a government. They're providing services, education, they're providing healthcare services, and they are eventually acquiring more new modern technology. However, the opposition movement is very divided. It's composed of a wide variety of groups, including ethnic armed groups, to elected members of the parliaments, and to the civil society groups. So there were disagreements among the groups about the political objectives, as well as the approaches to deal with the military. The military is highly institutionalized. They are very cohesive. They have relatively superior military weapons. They rely on their proxy militias and border guard forces to deal with to fight the opposition movement. And they are also having tacit and active support from Russia, China, and a few Asian countries. And the fact that the economy is slowly recovering and people are weary of the war also play advantage to the military. However, the military is, has very little, no legitimacy, and it also enjoy a low moral on the ground. They're losing battles on the ground. That's why they are relying more on airstrikes to deal with the opposition movement. And they have not been able to govern the country. So what's going to, this is my last point. So what's going to happen in 2023? So the military used 2008 Constitution as a way to as its exit strategy, and it will follow the 2008 constitutions. And according to the constitutions, the emergency period can be extended only for 2 years, and after that, within 6 months, they need to have elections. So the military is going to have elections, and they have engaged in a wide variety of activities to prepare for the elections. However, because the election is not going to be free and fair, because the election is not going to address any of the grievances, any of the transitional justice issues that we would like to address, the opposition movement have not only boycotted the election, but also have some elements within the oppositions have decided to go all out war against the military. So if that's the case, elections could trigger more violence by anti-SAC forces. So the outlook is going to depend on whether the SAC will be able to hold elections and how the opposition's movement will react. So we have these different scenarios here. So the scenarios at the bottom is where the military will definitely postpone the elections. In the case where they think that the elections would trigger more violence and that would further undermine its control. And if that's the case, we will get to a situation where the country is going to be under the military rule, continue to be under the military rule, and we might be getting back to the situations in 1990s where the military might probably have some national convention to revise or to draft a new constitution. But if elections were held, we have three scenarios. The first scenario is that they will be able to held in 80% of the territories, and then eventually get back to the pre-2015 situation where the military-supported political party is able to govern the country. I think that this scenario is very unlikely. And the most likely scenario would be that the military will be able to hold elections in 50% of the territories. By all means, they will do by all means to win the elections. And if this is the case, the military, semi-military, civilian government will continue to be partially or fully resistant by the opposition movement. And finally, the elections could trigger more violence, and which would revert the military to stage another coup. So regardless, two things are certain. Elections will not be free and fair, and we will see more and more violence coming up in 2023.
Thank you so much, Prof. Ardeth, for laying out what we could expect amidst all these uncertainties. I'm sure there will be many questions asking for further details from you. But in the interest of time, may I now move on to invite Ajahn Kem Tong to give the political outlook for Thailand.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. For Thailand's political outlook in 2023, I'm going to address three main topics. One is the monarchy. The second one is the election, which believed to be the main event for this year. And lastly, I will address the post-election obstacle for any upcoming government. So that would be for the second half of this year. So let's start with the monarchy, which will have a short-term and long-term implication on Thai politics. So for the past 2 years, if we remember, there's a huge, massive street protest calling for monarchical reform. And throughout 2021 and 2022, the palace tried and successfully cracked down on the call for reform. And this crackdown is through a lot of what we call lawfare. So a charge of lèse majesté, the Constitutional Court ruling out that the call for reform is an overthrow of democratic regime, and that's unconstitutional. So the palace successfully silenced the critics, any call for reform, but it's a Pyrrhic victory at best, because that means the palace has to force all the judicial institutions to deplete their own credibility, to rules in very extraordinary legal procedures, in many cases criticized by international community. And in the long-term implication, this crackdown will make reconciliation between the palace and the younger generation more challenging, because throughout our democratic struggle, there's massacres, there's almost a civil war, but it is usually framed in people against army narrative, and the palace is considered to be just a bystander or a neutral actor. But for this particular conflict, I mean, it is very apparent that the palace is part of the conflict, is one of the actors. But anyway, despite the palace's success in cracking down the call for reform, on the 14th of December, Vajiralongkorn's eldest daughter, Princess Pacharakitiyapha, collapsed during her exercise. It turned out she has a stroke and cardiac arrest, which left her brain dead, coma, and now on life support system. And Princess Pacharakitiyapha was, although she is not an official heir to the throne, but for a lot of people in royalist circles consider her to be the best candidate for succession. She studied law, she seems intellectual, approachable, and well-loved by many of the elite community. So her mishap served as a reminder that actually the Chakri dynasty is still in a succession crisis. Pacharakitiyapha's youngest brother, Prince Tipankon, who's the only male heir of Vajiralongkorn, is said to be mentally challenged. As a Thai person, I can neither confirm or repudiate that accusation. Okay. No, but there's a long-term implication on Thai politics, because Vajiralongkorn has his own personal army within the army itself, and he amassed a large amount of wealth. Like, he is one of the wealthiest monarchs in the world. So someone has to do something with his personal army and also that kind of wealth, and that's a big question, and that makes a lot of elites very anguished. But in the short term, for this year in particular, there's a big question. The election is coming up. That's my next topic. But now the king is in crisis, in some kind of crisis. So the question is whether this crisis will disrupt the political schedule. Will we still have the election in May 2023? The main question is like, in time of crisis, will the palace resort to some extra constitutional intervention? Or at the very least, if there's a state funeral, will it delay the election, and for how long? And that's the question that we don't know the answer yet. But let's move on to the election, which is supposedly the biggest event of the year. The latest, according to the constitution, would be in May 2023, if not earlier. And there's a sign this week that the election might happen much earlier than we expected, because General Prayut Chan-o-cha formed a new party, and a lot of MPs migrating out of his former government and into various political parties. So that leaves the parliament dysfunctional, because there's no one working in the parliament anymore. So there's no reason for this government to continue until March or April, because there's nothing to be done there anymore. But the most interesting thing about this election would be that there will be no more ideological division among parties. So I think it would be very difficult to describe any party to be pro-junta or anti-junta or pro-democracy, anti-democracy political parties, because now Thai politics backslide so much. In 2019, when the junta tried to form the party and win the election, they resort to first, they're buying up a lot of local politicians, most of them from Thaksin's Thai Rak Thai network. The second tactic is to coerce them or extort them with investigation of corruption. So if these politicians agree to join the Palang Pracharat party, they would drop the corruption investigation. So actually there's a lot of local former Thaksin's men moving into Palang Pracharat's party. So, and that started the trend. So right now, if you look into each political party and you realize that they look more or less identical, almost identical. So Thai politics devolved back into the competition, what we call dynastic policy, dynastic politics. So it's a competition on who has the more or the most effective network of vote canvassers, like who can gather the vote in that locality. But let's focus on the government side first. The two key persons of the coup in 2014 is General Prayut Chan-o-cha, who is now the prime minister under Palang Pracharat, but he is moving out. And General Prawit Wongsuwan, which is actually like his Prayut's senior partner in crime. And for right now, that alliance between Prayut and Prawit is over. Prawit is still the head of Palang Pracharat Party, PPRP, and he is preferred by most politicians because of his personality, very generous, very amicable, very approachable. Prayut, on the other hand, is considered to be a liability for most political parties because his failure in the past 8 years has proved that he is incapable of running anything smoothly. Anyway, although he is shunned by most politicians, the most important thing is Prayut has been, and will be the choice for the palace. I mean, he is the man that the palace can trust. So that leads to a very interesting party. In a normal election, we expect Prawit to win. But in this time, as I mentioned earlier, with this crisis, so there's a possibility, rumors in the Thai political circle that the palace might at the very last minute endorse Prayut Chan-o-cha for another term. But the opposition is also divided. The main party, Pheu Thai party, Thaksin's proxy, is expected to win, to be the major winner of the election. But anyway, because of the constitutional arrangement that allowed the Senate, 2,250 senators to vote for prime minister as well. So we don't expect Pheu Thai to be able to form a single party government, and they have to make a coalition with some of either Prayut's party or Prawit's party. So you're gonna, we expect some very interesting coalition gonna happen. So you're gonna see the coup that tried to oust the Thaksin Shinawatra, and now they have to make a pact with Thaksin Shinawatra to form a government in the upcoming election. But basically, there's no policy difference among these political parties. There's no ideological division, as I said. So there seems to be a general consensus among political parties, the do and don'ts of this election. First, don't touch upon the palace. Like the topic of monarchical reform, the topic of abolition of lèse-majesté, the topic of investigation into the palace, private army or personal wealth, is a taboo. Like no palace, no political party is gonna touch it, or they face a dissolution from the constitutional court. So that comes down to economic policy. There's a set of economic policy that everyone tries to offer, and that's a result of COVID mismanagement and economic downturn of Thai economy in general. But anyway, as I say, if you read into this policy and you see that actually they look the same. They look pretty much the same. Everyone promised about economic policy and stuff, but in reality, as I said, the deciding factor would be the effectiveness of the network of vote canvassers. So what we call a big house. So you have a big house in the east who's gonna vote in block for you, and you rely on there's several big houses in the north, and so that kind of politics. So there's clearly a backsliding, and this backsliding would be a challenge for the youth, the younger generation, the first-time voter. In the past 3 years, they protest, they fought, and they sacrificed so much, calling for a better country, a better politics. And at the end, when the next election comes, the result gonna be disappointing. They're gonna get that old style, mafia style politicians. They're gonna see a lot of coalition between the former enemies, the pro-junta and the anti-junta finally join hands to form the government, and a lot of those progressive issues that they try to advocate for years will be ignored in the parliament. So eventually, we start hearing a younger generation criticizing parliamentary democracy and these politicians as corrupt, as dysfunctional, as useless. So basically, these criticisms are very similar to what the yellow shirt, basically the youth parents 2 decades ago, used to criticize Thai parliamentary politics back then. The only difference that remains to be seen is whether they're gonna go the path that the yellow shirt had gone. So abandon the parliament, go into the street, and find some like morally righteous philosopher king to rule over the country, or they're gonna swallow that and press on saying that they still have faith in the parliamentary politics, which is a very difficult choice for them, actually. But whoever wins, I expect Thaksin to win. Everyone, not I, but most of polls and think that Pheu Thai gonna win. But what awaits for them will be very different from what Thaksin experienced in his term in 2001 to 2005. First is the palace. For years, Thaksin tried to placate the palace paranoia about red shirt and the anti-monarchical sentiment. And I think Thaksin realized that forming up the red shirt is actually a big mistake, because when the elite is paranoid, they strike back, and they strike back hard. So during the protest, Thaksin tried to distance himself and even criticized the youth protest as like disrespectful to the monarchy. But whether that's enough for the palace to trust Thaksin remains to be seen. But one thing is for sure, that Thaksin couldn't control the palace behavior. Thaksin couldn't control the palace intervention in politics, in military, or the palace spending. If you look at expenditure in Thai fiscal budget, the palace eat up a lot of budget, and the next government will have no say about that. The second thing is the bureaucracy itself, the main engine, and the bureaucracy has its own problem. For 8 years under Prayut Chan-o-cha's administration, nepotism, conflict of interest, politics, very pervasive. And the sense of the lack of accountability is very pervasive as well. I mean, if you know you have a backing of Prayut Chan-o-cha, you are free to do whatever to please your boss and don't care about the consequence. It's very common to expect bad policies. That's the mildest form you're gonna see. The worst you're gonna see corruption, directly corruption, bad policies, extortion, heavy taxation on foreign business because they can. At the worst form, corruption is very blatant, and it comes to the point that even if they are arrested with cash in their hand, with bribery, and the Anti-Corruption Commission just dropped the case without giving a reason. So that's kind of a challenge, that how the next government gonna administer the country with this kind of bureaucracy that very calcified and don't listen to politicians at all, or to the cabinet at all. In particular, the military, which has its own spending and no one can control it. And lastly, the Sino-Thai conglomerates and corporates in Thailand has grown significantly since 10 years ago, and now institutionalized deeply into Thai economy and into Thai state mechanisms. That kind of ties make oligopoly very, very strong in Thailand, and I mean, making any reform on economy impossible. So any upcoming governments after in the second half of 2023 would fail to deliver whatever they promised over the election. They're gonna the political landscape has changed a lot in 20 years. I mean, the palace become stronger, the bureaucracy becomes stronger, the military become almost autonomous, and the oligopoly in Thai economy is almost impossible to break that. So that leaves very little room for any upcoming government to maneuver to run the government. So we have come. So I think what we witnessed in 2023, the election will not be a transition, but actually this election will help normalize this very unfree and unfair political arrangement of Thai politics. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ajahn Kem Tong. Ladies and gentlemen, I think both Professor Ardev and Ajahn Kem Tong have laid out with their analyses the tea leaves as they are. I always say that we're not in the business of crystal ball gazing, even though I think both Thailand and Myanmar, people in Thailand and Myanmar do set a lot of store by fortune tellers and soothsayers. We have to end this session in 10 minutes' time. And those of you in the audience who know me do know that I'm all for democracy and consultation, but I'm going to channel the powers who sit in the capitals of both Thailand and Myanmar and be a bit authoritarian. I'm going to ask for very focused questions, maybe 2 main questions each from the floor. And I'm also going to throw my 2 speakers to you to buttonhole afterwards when this session ends. So the floor is open for 2 burning questions, if possible, 1 each on Thailand and Myanmar. Okay, I see 2 hands from this side of the floor. I see actually 4 hands from this side of the floor. I don't see any from this side. So those 4 hands raised for questions, I'll try to squeeze those in. Please be brief in your questions to the 2 panelists. Who'll go first?
It's working, yeah. Thank you so much. I'm wondering whether you can elaborate on the relationship of the political and economic crisis in Myanmar on its neighbors, and also the regional stability when we're looking at refugees crossing the border, living in Thailand, or if you also look at the Rohingya crisis too. Both panelists, thanks.
Maybe I'll take all the questions first so that our speakers can give you composite answers. I think, John, you had your hand. And if we could get the microphone to people who have raised their hands in the back of the room.
Thank you, Mo. I'm John Brandon. I'm with the Asia Foundation in Washington, D.C. My question is for Dr. Kem Tong. One thing you didn't mention in your assessment of Thailand in 2023 is that Prime Minister Prayut, he has started a new political party, right, the United Thai Nation. But the Constitutional Court last year ruled that he would only be able to serve for a total of 8 years, and he served about 6 already. So why would this party want him when he can't serve a full term? Why would any political party So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
I think there were two more questions.
Hi, I'm Brian, and I work for the public service in Singapore. My question is to Prof. Arden. I was wondering if you could comment about Russia's and China's influence, interests, and involvement in Myanmar. Thank you.
Yes, sir. One last question. If you could also identify your name and affiliation.
Good afternoon. My name is Robert Fox from the Joint Foreign Chambers of Commerce in Thailand. Question about Thailand. So the election is not going to be resolving fundamental divides. It won't resolve economic betterment issues, etc. What, in your view, are the positive messages that you would give to investors in Thailand? Are we going to muddle through dealing with a bureaucracy that isn't materially going to change? Are we going to see reforms? There's competition from Vietnam, et cetera, et cetera. Your views, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we have two questions each for our panelists. Ardeth, you want to tackle the Myanmar questions first?
About political economic crisis impact on the neighboring countries. This is, the impact is huge. First is refugees crisis. Because of armed conflicts, there have been a lot of IDP populations, people who are internally displaced, and some of these people cross the border and are now taking refuge in the Thai-Burma border areas and also in India border. So that's one crisis. Another crisis is that there has been a massive outflow of people out of the country in a variety of ways. There are people who are not politically involved but are now leaving the country because the country has no economic future, so they're leaving the country for better educational or better economic opportunities. So, if you until lately, before the government decided not to issue a new passport, there were a long line of people waiting to apply for passports. So every day you see, a massive number of workers from Myanmar going to either Thailand, Malaysia, or Singapore, and to various parts of the countries, and students are also leaving to study in Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, and also massive outflow of capital. So people are, some of the well-to-do people are now buying apartment complexes and properties in Thailand. So, it's regardless, it has some combinations of both, positive and negative impacts on the neighboring country.
On the question about Russia-China involvement.
Russia and China, Russia is, geographically far away from Myanmar, and but Russia has been providing Myanmar with, military arms, and recently Myanmar has increased level of economic cooperations with Russia. However, I think China's situation is a little bit different. China is more concerned about political economic stability in the region. China is more concerned about preserving its economic interests. So China has diversified its stakes by engaging not with the military, but also with other groups that are, key important players in the regions. So China's played a bit more nuanced role, but China is a key actor here compared to Russia.
Thank you. Over to you, Ajahn Kemtong.
Thank you. Prayut's rationale for forming a new party is not very clear to us because I think it's clear that he is a liability. The fact that he moved out from Palang Pracharat allow Palang Pracharat to make coalition with many other political parties that vow not to involve with the coup makers at all. So also actually it's clear that there's a consensus that Prayut should leave, but he decided to stay on. Partly, I think, is the fear of being prosecuted after stepping down, because he did a lot of extra legal, giving like a lot of unlawful orders and make a lot of unlawful decisions. So if he stepped down and without any power, he's gonna face some revenges for sure. But but another reason would be his own personality, the ambition. He's really convinced that he is the best and he should continue. But if he wins, there's a possibility that there will be a constitutional amendment to lift that 8 years limitation. So that I think there's a high chance, because every politicians I talk to really hate that 8 years cap. Okay. But the election coming and what the impact on economy, I think one thing that is clear is any recovery from the legacy of the coup going to be very slow and painstaking. They have to undo like 8 years of mismanagement. They have to slowly remove those army generals from regulatory agencies, and they have to fill in more business-friendly regulate choice into those departments, and that's gonna take years. And there's precedent by the Supreme Administrative Court that a transfer of any high-level bureaucrats can be illegal if it's deemed like conflict of interest, something like that. So there's positive side of it. I mean, you stop the bleeding, you get a more business-friendly, but it's gonna be very, very slow and very precarious, because every transfer has a legal risk of the government being ousted by the court. So that's one thing. But related to foreign policy, just mention it a bit. A more civilian cabinet will have a better foreign policies for sure. So I would say Thailand's foreign policy will be more aligned with the global communities on the issue of Russia-Ukraine war and on the crisis in Myanmar as well. Thank you.
Thank you for giving us something to look forward to on that note, Ajahn Kemtong. And for Professor Ardeth, I think thank you for outlining the very difficult situation that people in Myanmar face. To our audience members, I would like to thank you for your patience, and my apologies to our online audience members for not being able to entertain the questions. I think this panel has highlighted two certainties among the certainties, and that is the language of change can be used and manipulated to, again, prolong the impact of disruption. And we have seen in these two country examples what the impact of disruptive practices has been and will continue to be with the trends currently pointing the way they are, unless there is another trend break. And we are just 1 minute short of the required ending time. I would just like to ask all of you to express our appreciation to our two speakers who've actually been very courageous in sharing their views candidly with the Regional Outlook Forum 2023.